QB say.
Go. Good morning, listeners, and welcome back to another very special episode of the Menatlity podcast. We talk all things training, nutrition, and psychology to maximize your performance. Today, we are joined by another very special guest, a prominent BJJ star, the founder and coach of Settlage strength and conditioning coach himself, Joshua Settlage. How are we doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on, Ben.
And I appreciate your time. I'm really excited to talk to someone like yourself. We haven't had I don't say combat sport veteran, but I'll give you the title, combat sport veteran. We've moved into that field a little bit more over the recent year, and it's good to have the information come straight from the horse's mouth. You can always pick stuff up from a textbook, but I'm a big believer that anecdote and first-hand experience is also part of the textbook answer. So I appreciate you jumping on. It's going to be a deep and fun chat.
For sure, man. For sure. Yeah, I feel like I was just talking with my mom this morning. We were talking about how jujitsu and combat sports is just blown up all over the place.
Yeah,
Like it's gotten so much popular post pandemic and post lockdown. And the
yeah.
coolest thing is seeing guys from the more traditional bodybuilding or powerlifting community stepping into combat sports. And as the athletes start moving over, so do the coaches. And so seeing guys like yourself, seeing guys like Nsima Yang and all those cats like starting to move into the combat sports space is really exciting.
I think it's such a like for guys like me. I know that I have a I want to say a quote unquote boxing background, but really I just did it younger when I was a kid. I was playing rugby league. Dad always said like have a combat in your background just so you can handle yourself and discipline and respect that sort of thing. It's just such a different field of nutrition compared to what we do with like physique athletes. Like I coach bodybuilders, I coach performance athletes, but a lot more around it is just such a unique difference in how you do things and how you fuel things, and obviously maximizing training performances. It's such a unique twist on the craft, where versus like we just have to get someone shredded. We don't care how you feel. We don't care about how you're like care about performing, but realistically, it's like, do you look dicey and are you shredded to the bone? Yes. Okay, job done. For combat guys, like are you mentally feeling good? Are you fueled for your training and sparring sessions? Are you getting weights thrown around? But at the same time, are you making weight for your category? And then are you able to get fueled back up to go to the ring and mess someone up? So it's such a unique like dynamic of what you got to do as a coach. The first guys I put through the ring, I was like, oh, this is different. This is like it's good fun, but I'm like, this is different. Do you feel the same sort of way?
I do. I do. So I grew up doing martial arts. I grew up wrestling. And in the United States, the traditional path for wrestling is like you can only do wrestling as a hobby up until high school. And then anything beyond that is like you're pretty much chasing the Olympics or you're going to pursue a career coaching wrestling. And I was not a great wrestler by any stretch of the imagination. So I didn't wrestle in college. And but when I was in college, I was already lifting and had been lifting for a number of years, but I was like, man, I don't gotta wrestle. Like I'm gonna do some bodybuilding. So I did one bodybuilding show and it was awesome. It was like one of the funnest events I've ever done. And then shortly thereafter, I got into jujitsu. And for a little bit, I tried to like take the same nutrition approach as a bodybuilder, like getting
Yeah.
absolutely shredded for jujitsu. And that did not work out very well for that long. But it has been pretty cool to see like, okay, the experience of bodybuilding, the experience of stepping on stage, of dieting down for, 14 weeks or 12 weeks, however long my prep was. And then going through like all the emotions of like, okay, I'm in line. I'm almost going to step out on stage to hit my routine and stuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff, I think has so much value for
Mm-hmm.
combat sport athletes and even bodybuilding as a training style. I
Mm-hmm.
know like there's like this subsect of combat sports strength and conditioning that just likes to take dumps on bodybuilding styles of training. But I
Yeah.
think that combat sport athletes have so much to learn from bodybuilders and their approach to training that could really help improve their athletic performance as
Yeah.
well, even if they never plan on, you know, stepping on stage and getting the tan and all that stuff.
I always find it interesting that the subsects and the subcultures of quote unquote the fitness or the coaching space where we all just like to shit on each other. And there's always just someone ripping on someone from a different, like, bodybuilders can't even fight, so they're not tough. And fighting guys, I can just throw them around. It's like, yeah, but could you? It's just like it's so petty to me. Like the amount of different styles of training and coaching and strategies. I'm like, I just want to learn it. I just want to know how to do it and how it works. Right, like. This part of the body is unique. The way the body responds to this is unique. I want to know how to do it. But like you said, we get people that want to talk, bodybuilders don't do anything. They're not tough guys, whatever. Like, hey, I agree. I couldn't beat off a wet paper bag. Like, I'm not going to try to. When push comes to shove, I'll throw hands, but I'm not going to try. But it's just like this weird perception that that's what it's all about, and we got to make fun of each other. I'm like, I want to know, because like your I guess philosophy, your culture of training is roll hard, lift hard. You're combining the best of both worlds. Like, fantastic segue, by the way. I didn't actually plan that, but it's such a, like, and I don't want to say it spits in the face of standard sort of combat sport training or bodybuilding, but like you said, we're seeing bodybuilders move onto the mats. We're seeing coaches move onto the mats now. You have this philosophy or culture in your coaching style, which is roll hard, lift hard, and you're pushing that very premise. Like, go hard on the mats, but you're also going hard in the weights room. What founded that? Is it the belief of more power, more speed, more ability on the mats from translating from power and training in like lifting hard? Is that what we're sort of seeing here as a crossover?
A little bit. So when I was wrestling, at least in the United States, strength and conditioning, even though there's so many issues with the way wrestlers do strength and conditioning work, strength and conditioning is deeply integrated into wrestling, like pull-ups, calisthenics, sandbag work, rope climbs, stadium sprints. Like, that has been part of wrestling for forever, pretty much. And so when I was wrestling, like, that was just so normal. It was like, if you weren't wrestling 5 days a week and lifting before school in the morning, people would be like, well, I guess you don't want to be that great of a wrestler because you're not doing what's required to like get
Yeah.
jacked and
Yeah.
get strong. And so that was just normal. And so I loved wrestling, and I wrestled for 4 years, and I was lifting before I started wrestling, stopped wrestling, just kept lifting because I freaking love lifting. I mean, I would say, like, I probably love lifting even more than jujitsu, which is crazy to say. But I keep lifting after stopping wrestling. I do the bodybuilding show, and then I get into jujitsu, and it was so weird because like, not that many people were lifting. They would do like, like yoga flows and kettlebell circuits and stuff. And I was like, does anybody just freaking lift? Like, try to get strong? And it was kind of a weird culture shock. Like, I don't know what I expected going into jujitsu. Expecting it to be just like wrestling, where strength and conditioning was deeply integrated.
Yeah.
But not a lot of people were doing that. And the content out there at the time when I first started training jujitsu, there were some good guys out there, guys like Phil DeRue, guys like Zach Evanesh. They were definitely posting content out there for combat sports, strength and conditioning. But outside of them, there weren't that many voices. And the people that I was training with, they were getting kind of banged up, they were getting injured, and they'd ask me a question like, hey, like, Jay, how are you, like, do you ever get injured? And I was like, oh, I get like little bumps here and there, but I don't have any like serious injuries. They're like, oh, like, well, how do you do that? It's like, well, I just lift. Like, I like being strong. That's what I do when I'm not here at jiu-jitsu. And so that kind of is how I started my business, was just like answering questions for all my training partners, coaching my training partners. And what's awesome with that is that since I started jiu-jitsu in 2017, the, I guess, recognition of the importance of strength and conditioning for grapplers has increased a ton.
Yeah.
And now I think we're at this problem, which is a good problem to have, that a lot of grapplers are doing strength and conditioning, but I think they're taking it a little bit too soft, or they're majoring in the minors.
Yeah.
And it just got to this point where last year I was thinking, like, I just freaking love lifting heavy. Is that a crime? Like, hey, who cares if it's not like the most functional fascia oriented movement, but like, I love deadlifting. So I'm just going to keep deadlifting pretty much until like my body says I can't. And I think there's definitely like pros and cons to that approach for sure. But I just kind of got to this point where I was seeing all this content out there. And I was like, is anyone lifting heavy anymore? Like, let's not forget, like, lifting heavy is the fun part. Just like going to jujitsu and rolling hard is the fun part. And so I kind of like had a little bit of a rebrand and a shift where I was like, you know what? I just want to help people lift heavy and roll hard. Like, let's get freaking strong. Let's lift some heavy ass weights. Let's like turn the music up in the gym. Let's start, I know you're down in Australia, so I don't know if you're, a big fan of Parkway Drive, but at least in the United States at the gym, like we're always blasting Parkway Drive.
Yeah, yeah.
We're getting crazy to them. So like, let's crank up Parkway Drive. Let's lift some heavy ass weights. And then let's also train to improve our grappling skills with a good amount of intensity and roll hard. And so that's kind of like the approach I take now. And I think that there's so many facets and nuances to that. You mentioned psychology earlier when you were opening the show. And I think just the psychology of lifting heavy and rolling hard, it demands a lot from you. Like when you step up to a heavy barbell, when you get under a heavy squat, or maybe you're not squatting, you're doing, heavy dumbbell bench press, like you can't have any other distractions. You can't be thinking about taxes. You can't be thinking about like, oh shoot, I got to go get my tires rotated when I leave the gym today. Like you got to be so narrowed in and focused on the challenge in front of you. And lifting heavy can do that. And rolling hard can do that as well. When you're rolling hard and you're like deep into a 10-minute round and, you're exhausted, you're tired, you got someone that's trying to, take your arm off or take your head off, you can't be distracted thinking about other things. You have to be fully present and focused on the task at hand. And I think that when we voluntarily kind of face those challenges, whether it's in the gym or on the mat, I believe that that makes us better prepared for the unexpected challenges that come hit us in everyday life. And so that's really what I love doing. Is I love lifting heavy. I love rolling hard. I love teaching people and educating people on how to do that well and how to do that successfully. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
Now, I love that because you've touched on so many things that I personally, the way I coach as a philosophy, align in so many ways with. One of the things that I've noticed in even our side of the, I guess, the coaching spectrum is, and I'm curious what your take will be on this. I've noticed a large shift towards people getting so caught up in the nuances of like fatigue management, over specificity, over complication, worrying about what the most maximal angle of contraction of the lat fascia and the insertion versus the higher versus the bottom, like upper or lower lat, and what this exercise is going to target mostly. And then it's also paired with like, don't go too close to failure. Don't go in there and go too hard. You got to pull back and reserve for recovery. And there used to be a point in time, like, I'm 33. We played rugby league. It was contact sport. It was hard contact sport. It was train for power, train for strength, try and get better at just breaking the line and breaking the defensive line. There's a point now where it seems like we've got away from just enjoying the hell out of training. We've got away from like we used to want to go to the gym for like 2 hours just to lift stuff and throw it around, hit some crazy volume numbers and some set numbers. Like, yeah, I get the whole, correction of that and like, spare the joints and just actually try and train optimally to a degree. Go make sure your sets are controlled and good and stimulate hypertrophy. But at the same time, it's like part of it is you have to retain the fun in it. Otherwise, are you even going to enjoy it? And I imagine there's a similar context in going to the mats and actually wanting to roll and wanting to enjoy rolling with another guy, like or another girl. Like you want to actually enjoy the process of, yeah, you're trying to take someone's arm off, they're trying to take yours off. It's a game of chess going back and forward. But if you go in there with this half-ass effort, you're only going to get half-ass results, and you're going to leave so much on the mat, or we say, so much on the table, so much on the bench, because you're just not going in there with the intention to execute. It's more worried about, I'm going in there, but I've got to worry about my fatigue. I'm going in there, but I've got to worry about my recovery. I'm going in there, but I can't go too hard today because I've got another session tomorrow. Man, you watch guys like Blood and Guts and that sort of thing from the 80s and 90s and the bodybuilding videos, like all they were doing was just destroying themselves session after session, and they still came back and grew to be 250, 300-pound bodybuilders. Like at a certain point, we've taken training away from training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude, I 100% agree. I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. I think as the social media age has, in the best way possible, gotten more people into the gym, I think it's also the flip side of that coin is that it's gotten people a little bit too concerned with what they're doing in the gym and the exact way that they're doing it. And I think that it's just a natural progression of, as content has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. Before, like, probably the time when you started lifting, the time when I started lifting, we were either like reading articles and articles and articles and watching videos and videos and videos that weren't 60 seconds. They were like, the blood and guts, several hour, DVD set and stuff like that. And so we had all that context to look at what we were learning. We were watching Dorian Yates do those crazy pullovers to failure. We had the context of why he was doing that and when he was doing that and everything that kind of went into it. When we were reading those articles, or we were reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding, we had all of that context. And so we could start to take that information in and apply it, knowing that there's other context on why we're doing what we're doing. And what's great about social media is that it made information more accessible and we could get it faster. But the downside of that is that if you're just watching a 30-second, 40-second clip of a guy saying that you only need to do 6 reps to grow muscle, it's like, oh, I guess the conversation's over then. I just stop at 6 reps and go to failure, and that's fine. When there's so much more context that's important to understand. And that's really part of why I called my website The Strength Matrix. I'm like a giant huge movie nerd. And the way I see training is like in the movie The Matrix at the end, and hopefully no spoilers. It came out, almost 30 years ago, so everyone's had a chance to see it. But at the end, Neo's not looking at like the reality that the Matrix is portraying to him. He's just looking at all the code. And I think that as an athlete grows and develops, when they kind of get out of that beginner stage and they move into the intermediate and then move into the advanced stage, the most advanced athletes, the most successful athletes aren't really seeing like the Matrix. They just see all the code. They know what tools work for what purposes. They know the context of why someone should do this. Even you as a coach working with all the athletes that you work with, it's never like just a short thing. Like every athlete only does 6 reps to failure. It's like, there's some athletes that might do that. There are other athletes that might do 10 reps, or they might do a set of 20, and they might take 30-second rest for this person. Another person might take 5 minutes. And so I think that the coolest thing about social media is that, yes, it did bring the fun. It did bring like the allure of getting big and strong and everyone getting jacked. But I think on the other end, it's also important that we recognize like, man, like kind of came at the downside of removing a lot of the context that a lot of the previous generation kind of grew up with and was inundated with as they were getting into lifting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think because of that generational gap, we had MySpace and then to Facebook. Kids now are growing up with 30-second Instagram and wondering why they can't sit still in the classroom. There's so much detail that's left out, but because we've been marketed to believe that hype is what's worth grabbing, and the hook content and the rage bait and the clickbait and the attention seeking, it's great for someone to grow a brand. It's great for someone to grow a following, but it's not giving the context, the nuance, and the detail that specific topic deserves. Doesn't matter what field of coaching you're in my opinion, that level of nuance is required if you're going to make such broad stroke statements. It's got to be under context and with detailed information. And I get, that's probably why I'm never going to serve, a million follower Instagram, is because I can't bring myself to do it in a space where everyone's doing it. But, we have videos where I'm trying to explain a point. It might be 2 minutes. And even then I'm like, how do I get this shorter? I'm like, I can't get this shorter and feel like I'm giving justice to the topic enough to be like, look, there's at least an answer for you. I've also got 100 hours of stuff on YouTube to go watch that will help that answer, but you're going to only listen to this. So here's 2 minutes. And even that to me just feels gut wrenching. Like I've left out detail, but it's the game that we play, and it's the way that the society is built now. And as you said, it's great because it's brought more attention to sport, more attention to fitness and the coaching industry and getting people into the gym and training. But I think with that comes those polarities of content creators that, oh, if you're doing more than 2 sets, you're an absolute idiot and a moron. You don't understand evidence-based coaching. And it's like, yeah, man, like I get what you're trying to do here, but you're failing so many people. Like you're letting them down with this rhetoric that you're trying to put out. Like there is so much more nuance than just 2 sets and stop. It's like, okay, but are you really providing justice to this topic? Are you really helping people? You're making them more confused.
For sure. For sure. I just heard a podcast that Dr. Jordan Shallow posted, and he talked about we're now in the age of where there's content creators and there's coaches.
Yes.
And I think that, and who knows how the pendulum will swing one way or the other over the next several years, but that is kind of where we're at right now, where we've got guys that have been lifting for less than 2 years that have read a bunch of studies, but never coached anybody. And they're making a ton of content. And I definitely don't want, if someone listens to this and are like, oh, damn, he's talking about me. I'm definitely not saying like stop posting content, but there's definitely a way that it can be done where it's like, hey, this is what I read and this is what I'm doing. Come along for
Yeah.
the ride and watch the results, as opposed to this is what I read and you're a freaking idiot if you don't
Yeah.
believe it.
Yeah. I could ramble on social media all day, but I actually want to start. I want to pick your brain and move the conversation towards what you're actually good at. Obviously, social media is good. You've got a great social media presence. You kill it there. But we're going to touch on a little bit of like psychology of training. I want to move get into around nutrition, training, psychology for actual camps for athletes. Obviously, you wrestle yourself. Um, the BJJ space is not something I'm quite as familiar with. So I would have to imagine there's even listeners for us that are kind of similar. Now, when you guys go into a camp, how long do you run a camp for? I know you've done bodybuilding, so I kind of like in my head, I used to play rugby league, so our season was 25 weeks. Now I do bodybuilding. Our camps or preps are 20 to 25 weeks. What are you guys running up into as a prep to get someone ready from hey, we've signed the contract to it's now time to get on the mats? What are we looking for there in terms of like time frame and the way a prep runs?
Yeah. So it really depends on the athlete. There are some athletes that I work with that compete all the time. Like they're competing not every other weekend, but at least once a month, if not more often than once a month. And then there are athletes that are a little bit more on the hobbyist side that compete maybe twice a year. So for the athletes that are on the hobbyist side, where they got full-time jobs, probably
Yeah.
got one or two kids, they got a life outside of jujitsu, which I don't know what they're talking about with that, but they got like they're normal people, right? Usually I tell them like, hey, we need to make sure that we have a really solid training camp that's at a minimum of 8 weeks and a maximum of 12 weeks. If we're going beyond 12 weeks, like if you sign up for a competition that's 17, 20 weeks out, then I'll probably just kind of create a almost like a preseason or workup for them. But I
Yeah.
really don't want them being in the rigors of training camp longer than 12 weeks. 12 weeks gives us like a really solid 8 week kind of like standard training camp with a 4 week peaking phase. If someone is doing, they only have 8 weeks, we can still get a lot of work done in that time. Usually it's about 6 weeks of super hard work, 1 week peak, 1 week deload or taper, and then competition day. So that's typically how I structure it for the hobbyists. And I work with some guys that if they're only competing twice a year, like we really take their off season really serious, where we're making sure that we're increasing their aerobic capacity. We're really like trying to build out strength and get them as jacked as possible. Then as training camp starts, where the jujitsu training is going to ramp up, we might dial back some of their strength and conditioning. For some of the competitors that I've worked with in the past that are competing much more frequently, it can be difficult to have like a perfectly structured 8 week training camp for every competition. So what we'll do is we'll pick one or two competitions out the year, and I call them their big kahuna competitions, like the most important competitions. So this would be IBJJF Worlds, Masters Worlds, ADCC Trials. What's awesome is that there's more pro level events popping up
Yeah.
nowadays. Like there's one in the Midwest called Subspectrum that's real big. So whatever their most important competition is, we will kind of point everything towards that competition. So if someone is competing at Masters Worlds, which is actually the same week as CGI, I know you went to CGI last year. Are you going this year?
I don't think so this year. We're going to
Okay.
America, but I don't think we're going to be in Vegas this time.
Gotcha. Okay. Next year. Hopefully I'll see you there next year.
Man, it was good fun though. I'd never been to one that big before. It was good fun.
Bro, it was nuts. So yeah, so if an athlete's competing at Masters Worlds, that's their most important competition, but they also want to compete more often than just that one tournament a year. Maybe they compete at American Nationals, which is this weekend. Maybe they compete at some smaller open tournaments. We'll just structure training and gradually ramp up their strength and conditioning, pretty similar to how we would if they weren't competing, but we would just be really careful with how we're managing overall volume, managing overall intensity. So that way they can still feel pretty good when they do have those smaller competitions that they're going to compete in. So those are kind of the two approaches I take. I'd say like most ideal would be we're going to have at least a 12-week training camp that's coming off of a really good off season of working together, but that's not always the case. Sometimes I work with guys for a couple months and they say like, hey, they just, called me if I wanted a match. It's in 3 weeks. Like, let's plan for that. So then, the onus is on me on adjusting their training, adjusting their nutrition, and making sure we can make it happen.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I remember I was working with one of my guys and we are waiting for a fight. He was doing kickboxing, and he was kept getting told that there was going to be like we're going to do your first fight. We're going to do it. Get ready and that sort of thing. And it just kept getting put back. So we didn't have an actual date to structure camp. And then just one check-in came. He's like, "Oh, I've got 6 weeks." And I'm like, "Sweet." Like fantastic. Like we've dropped a bunch of fat. You're at least in good aerobic condition. Your body fat's in a good level, so you're not going to gas too early. But I can feed you up. But it was just like this. Oh, by the way, yeah, we've got this fight in 6 weeks' time. Never done a camp before. Let's go. And I'm like, cool, man. Let's do it. I'm like, that works for me, I guess. Like I don't really have a choice, so let's figure it out.
That dude, I think the guys, the amateurs probably have it the worst because at the amateur level, like all those guys are super hungry. They'll jump on any opportunity to get a fight or any opportunity to get competition because of how it could impact their career. And sometimes that means like I got to fight in 6 weeks, or some guy missed weight. I'm gonna drive up 4 hours and fight him tomorrow. And like there's all those crazy stories where at the pro level it's a little bit more regulated, it's a little bit more consistent and structured. So yeah, the amateur guys go through a lot.
They get the rough end of the stick. Now, when we're looking at like fueling for nutrition, like we were talked about a little bit there with like bodybuilding, the way it kind of differs. As I bring someone in for a camp, and I bring someone in for a prep, we're generally tapering calories down or to a degree increasing output. We're trying to drive fat loss, beta oxidation. For you guys, it's a mix of like you want to be making weight. This is where I think it's interesting how fight camp nutrition and just overall fighter nutrition is so important. Is that you want to be psychologically confident. I try to have my guys about 10%, sub 10%, maybe closer to 7, leading up to fight to make sure they make weight so we can actually replenish but not be too deprived. Where how do you sort of structure your nutrition in terms of tapering, calories down for weight, but also enough where you want to be fueling for performance? Because, like you said, we want to be making sure the time on the mats is effective. We want to make sure the time under the barbell is effective. You've got energy for glucose for like road runs and conditioning, cardio, but also making sure that you're recovering and resting enough between each session and across the day. Because God, some fighters I know, I guarantee you're probably the same way. You do 2 or 3 different types of training in one day, whether it be rolling the mats, weights, cardio, your camp starts to ramp up in total capacity. How are you sort of structuring nutrition? Obviously, it's going to be very, person to person dependent, but that starts to play a pretty integral role in psychologically how they're prepared, physically how they're prepared. So, how do you sort of structure your nutrition side of things?
Yeah, it depends on the competition because at least with jujitsu, there's a lot of variation with how weigh-ins, weight classes, and weight management is set up from competition to competition. So you and I were at CJI last year. That competition had 24-hour weigh-ins, and there were only 2 weight classes. There was above 80 kilos, there was under 80 kilos. So the above 80 kilo guys didn't have to worry about anything. The under 80 kilo guys had to worry about a lot. So in a competition like that, where you do have 24 hours to rehydrate and refuel, there's a lot that we can do with staying big, not necessarily carrying excess body fat, but just staying full, staying a little bit larger as an athlete, and then using a little bit of water manipulation to make the weight and then have plenty of time to rehydrate. There are other competitions like Master Worlds, which is coming up, where you weigh in with your full kit on right before your first match starts. So there is 0 time to rehydrate. And that is really, really, really tough. So in those cases, I don't even mess with weight cutting. I just tell guys like, tell me what, I'm actually working with a guy right now where he was debating whether or not he should cut weight for Masters Worlds. And I told him like, look, man, if you're at the bottom of your weight class, like, you're if the weight class is 164 and you weigh around 166, you should get bigger. You don't want to try to get below to the next lowest weight class because you're going to be coming in depleted against all the other guys that are going to be fully hydrated, probably have like a really good breakfast in their belly. So what we've done with him is just let him know like, hey, we're going to purposely get bigger. So that way you're a little bit fuller when you show up to weight. So that way, we're not going to put you over the weight class or make you get so big that you have to cut weight for the weight class you're currently in, but just making sure like, hey, you have some wiggle room. So let's use that to our advantage. Let's add a little bit of muscle to your frame. Let's go in feeling fully hydrated, full of carbs, making sure that everything's feeling good. So it's really, the nutrition is really dependent on the competition. If it's a competition where we have a lot of time to weigh in, or I'm sorry, weigh in and rehydrate before competition, there's some things that we might do to manipulate their weight a little bit more drastically.
Mhm.
But I think for most people, especially in jujitsu, I don't think weight cutting is really that beneficial. It's just an additional stressor that someone has to overcome. And I tell most of my athletes, if not all of them, I tell them, like, look, man, like, unless you're competing for a giant bag of cash, like if you're at CGI and the prize is $1 million, like I will help you cut as much weight as you need for $1 million. But if you're competing for like a $5 plastic medal, don't even bother cutting weight. Like it's just an additional stressor that I don't think is worth it in the long run. Plus, you have all the negative health effects that come from excessive and consistent weight cutting that we
Yes.
start to see with guys in MMA, especially even though bodybuilders aren't necessarily doing the same kind of weight cut, but constantly depleting themselves and getting that lean and that diced can have some health effects when it's not done properly. So weight cutting is really tricky, but my general recommendation is like, look, for most competitions where you don't have that much time to rehydrate, don't even bother cutting weight. Like, let's just make sure you're not fat going into competition. Let's get you as lean, not as lean as possible bodybuilding style, but as lean as possible for what you're comfortable with for your frame and your body size. And then just making sure that, you don't gain a bunch of weight and don't retain a bunch of water when you show up to competition. If you have more time to rehydrate, then yeah, we might play around with the weight cut a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect approach too, because I'm not sure what the grappling scene is like, but even nowadays, bodybuilding is still riddled with old school, dated hydration and manipulation strategies, and diuretic strategies and things like that. Like we're definitely learning more and moving more towards like the evidence based or more like scientific approach to being ready early, or being lean enough where that's not required, and using things like understanding how to try and modify potassium and sodium to try and benefit dehydration compared to loop diuretics and things like that. But I think like you said, even in the guys I know I'm working with currently, like I've got some clients now that were previous world title boxers that are now more just worried about body composition and post career health. And some of the stories I've heard about what they did to themselves to get stay like ring ready, and this is like going back 5 years, 10 years, being boxers for 20 years, and I was sitting there thinking, like, it always made more sense to me just to stay leaner or close to your cap with enough fuel in reserve to train hard. But where you're blowing out 10, 15, 20 kilos above your ring weight, and then having to try and fight your way back down in camp to get lean again, just to then try and deplete or make a cap. Like all that spits in my head is that you're going to be underperforming. Everything about that speaks under regulated performance, and you're hindering your chances in the ring. Like it just never made sense to me. But it was always like this: oh, I can get as big as I want, and then this like weight cut protocol is going to come in. This water cutting protocol will come in, and we'll make weight and get in the ring. Like, but what you just did, and the stress that puts you under, physically, psychologically, emotionally, like nutritionally, there's just no way you're going to be at your best come time to get in the ring. Like that, I'm,
I
I'm, I'm
I
curious.
100% agree. 100% agree. I heard you on a podcast. You said that, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, but I think you said that you tell your athletes that they have to earn their pharmacology. I think
Yes.
there's a similar approach that could be taken with the weight cut. Like
Yeah.
if you're 22% body fat and you're like, I want to get down to the next weight class, like we're not even going there. We're just,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how long it takes, but we're going to have a nice, steady, consistent rate of fat loss. And then when you're about 13%, 12% body fat as a male, okay, yeah, if you want to do a competition where there may be some water manipulation, there may be some weight cut in there, we can have that conversation. But you got to earn your weight cut, just like you would, like, you say to your athletes, you need to earn your pharmacology.
100% agree. I think like there's so much pressure. I don't say pressure. I think it's just dated knowledge. I'm speaking across fields here as opposed to I'm dabbling my feet in touching the combat sport arena, but it's just every time I've heard these conversations, spoken to these high level guys, getting from the horse's mouth what used to be done and what was being done, I'm like, when I hear it, nothing about it screams optimal performance. And
Mm,
that's where I'm like, if we're at the world, whether we're at the amateur level or the world class level, there's so many better ways to do things. I think that's where, I don't want to say we're kind of contradicting ourselves here, but you go back to the start of the conversation, we're talking about nuances and details. I want to apply those nuances and details to someone at the world level or the title level where, we can do those things instead of having to mess with performance. We're optimizing it. And we can, get the best out of get the most juice out of the fruit without having to, fully degrade the body. And I think that's where it's like, the old school nutritional science and sports performance science, it's like, oh, you just do this, 20% weight cut in fight week. You're like, sorry, what? You're doing what? What is left in the body to then go fight the next morning or the next day? Like I just don't comprehend it where it makes sense. And then, we end up with guys coming out of that because it's such a depletion and such a deprivation and restriction. They then counter swing and they binge eat, drink, alcohol, food, all the soft drinks and that's what diet sodas going back in. And they just spring back the weight, if not worse than what they did. They started the camp. I'm like, that just leads to us needing to have another aggressive camp in 6 or 12 months' time when you want to fight again. That doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense.
100%. You brought up a great point. Yeah, that big post competition swing is unfortunately huge with fighters since their competitions are more spread out. And with jiu-jitsu guys, I think they have an equal but opposite problem where they are constantly suppressing themselves to try to like stay close to weight, as opposed to like if you just stopped cutting weight, you could just move up a weight class and just feel better all the time instead of feeling awful all the time.
I just have to imagine like, and it's a great chance here to kind of like move towards psychology. We sort of touched on a little bit earlier. Surely you like going into a fight and you're down 20, 30% body weight because you're kind of blown up and you've got to pull it all back down to make the weight, like whatever your coaching strategy is with previous client or whoever you're working with. And it's this old school approach where you're cutting drastic amounts of weight in camp instead of staying leaner year round or a little bit tighter year round. That has to start playing in your mind a little bit where you're just feeling like, so I know my guys are wearing camps for bodybuilding shows. The mind starts playing tricks. The mind starts breaking. That's to me, that's the first thing that goes long before the body is whether or not someone can handle the level of caloric restriction, the isolation, the energy requirements, the consistency. That all starts to play up, and then paired with the fact that you're now thinking about food. And it's like, oh, that extra donut sounds great, or something that food that I didn't even like tastes delicious or sounds delicious, and it's mentally taking you from where you should be, which is present with your training, present with your nutrition, present just mindful with what you're eating, being social in everyday life, and actually trying to get the most experience out of your camp, which you've touched many times about, camps and the mats teaching a lot for life and discipline. At a certain point, that approach has got to start weighing on the psychology of an athlete, and it takes away from their ability to actually be locked in for the fight. Am I wrong in saying that, or is that do you feel the same way?
Yeah, dude, you're 100% spot on. And I think I try to tell my athletes like, look, like by the time training camp starts, you should already be in shape. Like training camp is not the place for you to get in shape. And if I'm your coach and we've been working together for a while and you're not in shape by the time training camp starts, I've failed as your coach. And I think when athletes are using training camp as their time to get in shape, I think that's where a lot of the mental wear and tear and degradation, for lack of a better term, starts to happen because of how unprepared they feel just for how hard training camp is. But if you're already in shape going into training camp, if you're already coming into training camp, your aerobic base is fully rocked out, your conditioning, your higher intensity conditioning is feeling good, your strength is good, you feel like full, maybe you're holding a little bit of extra body fat, but you're definitely not, out of shape or anything like that. You go into training camp and the sessions are tough, but you still feel pretty good like as you're going through it. And as you get closer to competition, yeah, like the fatigue is going to accumulate, but you still feel like that it's manageable, as opposed to someone who's starting training camp not in shape, where every single week of those 8 to 12 weeks feels like a grind. They have their peak week and a little bit of a deal is like, oh my gosh, like I finally get a chance to rest. And it's like, I'm sorry, buddy, but I think you're cooked. Like you should have started training camp already feeling good. And I think when training camp, it's kind of like an interesting thing, because in training camp you want it to be difficult enough to create a response for you to rise up to the occasion and get better. but you also don't want to have training camp be so insanely difficult that you start to lose any and all self-belief in yourself that you're actually ready to compete. And I think there's a really delicate balance to have with not just the conversations athlete is having with their skills coach and their strength and conditioning coach, but also a balance to be had with like, who are you training with? If you're a white belt and you're training with a black belt that never takes it easy on you and never lets you get any wins, you're probably going to show up to competition thinking that you absolutely suck. And what benefit is it to, it's kind of like just missing reps in the gym. If every single day you go to the gym, you miss a lift, it's like, how much benefit is that really giving you? As opposed to like, hey, this is what we did this week. Doing a set of 5 at 225 was really, really challenging. But the next week you did 225 again. It felt a little bit easier. And then the week after that, you do 225 again, and it felt really easy. Then the week after that, you add 5 pounds or whatever the case may be. So I think on the mental side, there's so many things that go into it, from having the confidence of knowing like, hey, I'm starting training camp. I feel good. I physically and in shape, as well as the other factors of like making sure that the skills coach running their training camp or the strength and conditioning coach is helping them understand like, look, you got to kind of ride that edge of having it be difficult enough to prompt you to rise in skill level to be ready to perform your best, while also not having it be so difficult that you just lose all belief in yourself.
I want to get you, you touched on something really important here. I think I want to get your opinion on it, or I'm curious on what your thoughts are on it. We've talked a lot about mental resilience, and even like we've got notes on a podcast. You've used this idea around the way the mats help build resilience, mental toughness, and develop life skills. I don't want to broadly stroke any of your athletes, but or just fighters in general. But I'm curious what your thoughts are. I'm definitely not trying to set you up for any clickbait here, because I know it probably will be a bit of a controversial question. But how do you find, or do you find, the athletes who are coming in unconditioned, or carrying that extra body weight, extra fat? Is it just a reflection of their the why behind why they want to wrestle and do BJJ and get into combat sport? Is it a reflection of their discipline in off season? Is it a reflection of their commitment to what they're actually trying to do, and they kind of think that fight camp will save them, or it'll rediscipline them or restructure their life? Are they trying to use that to hypercorrect for the fact they let themselves go, or is it just simply it's not their priorities, they don't really worry about it? Because to me, we have this balancing act in bodybuilding where, yeah, you can get bigger, but not all extra size equates to muscle tissue and contractile tissue that's going to be shown on stage. Chances are you just got fat. Now, why did you get fat? It's up for debate. Did you add an extra 2 to 5 pounds of muscle, but 20 pounds of body fat? Let's probably pull that off. Or is it because, you actually had all this other stuff going on in life? You probably shouldn't be competing in bodybuilding in the first place until we get that sorted. And body fat's a byproduct of that life issue, if you will, and we've got to address that. What do you find in these guys who are coming into camps unconditioned or quote unquote softer, where you're like, you know what? We don't have, this isn't an 8-week job. This is going to be a 10, 12, 15-week job where we've got to pre-prep this camp to get you fit. Then we go into camp. Like, what does that tell you about the athlete in terms of their mental resilience, their commitment, their discipline, the why behind why they're going into a fight?
Yeah. I wish there was like a more concise, like broad answer that I could give, but I think it is, at least in my experience, it's really just been dependent on the athlete.
Yeah.
I've worked with some athletes that love jujitsu and combat sports so much. Like you can't get them to take time off the mat. You have to drag them to the gym. You don't have to drag them to jujitsu. And so
Yeah.
they come to me knowing like, hey, like I know this is like my least favorite thing to do. And I know that if I want to get better, I need to do this, but I'm going to go hard in the paint at jujitsu. And so there are some guys that are like that, where their love for jujitsu, their love for combat sports is kind of driving that intensity. And some guys do that where they start training camp and they love jujitsu and they're in shape. Some guys love jujitsu, they're not in shape, and they're still going to go hard in the paint in training camp. And there are other guys too, where, and I've seen this happen a lot in jujitsu, because if you wanted to, you can compete every month. There's competitions all over the place. And especially when guys get injured, they feel that itch, they feel that need to compete, and it just like grows and grows and grows and grows, where they rush into competition a little bit too quickly, out of this feeling of what I've perceived as like I just want to get back into it, as opposed to like, hey, you just got cleared from your PT, that you can squat again. That doesn't mean you need to dive into training camp. We should
Yeah.
probably give it 6 months of just training jujitsu, no pressure to compete first before we dive into training camp. So, you know, in my experience, it's just been dependent on the athlete. There's been guys that, you know, you brought up the point of like, well, like, are there guys that rush into training camp as a way to like overcompensate for maybe a lack of discipline? And I think I've seen that before too, where guys kind of hit this point where they realize like, man, I got to do something to challenge myself. I got to do something to put a date on the calendar and force myself to have like some pressure on me to take action. And I do think there's benefit in that, because that's exactly what I did when I did the bodybuilding show. I did like a giant dirty bulk. I was like way too fat. And then I said I was going to lean out on January 1st. And then like a couple months later, I was still fat. So I was like, you know what? I just have to do a bodybuilding show, because if I just sign up for the bodybuilding show, I know I'm going to take this serious. So it's hard to say that someone should or shouldn't do that, because I know I've gotten value out of taking that approach, even though that's probably not the best long-term approach, maybe like a one-time or a two-time sort of deal. But ultimately, I think it's just dependent on the athlete. Some guys take that approach. Some guys are much more I'll put it this way. In jiu-jitsu, I've seen that there are some guys that are really studious and really cognitive. Like they love thinking about the techniques. They love thinking about the art of jiu-jitsu. And I have seen a trend where those guys are much more willing to take it as long as it takes to get in shape. I've also seen guys that just love going to jiu-jitsu and banging heads and rolling hard. And I have seen a trend where those guys do tend to rush into competition a little bit more compulsively, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense to a degree. And I think it's kind of indicative of how, you know, you can tell that you're a professional. As the answer was, it depends. I always love when I speak to someone, I'm like, again, it's never an intention to catch like this clickbait sort of snippet, but more so a chance for you to actually explain the way you do things or what you've seen, or lay out your evidence. Because I know that it is a contextual answer. It's like if someone were to ask me, hey, why do people bodybuild? Well, shit, there is 100 answers I can give you for that. 90 of them are probably they shouldn't do it in the first place, but I can give you 100 different answers. And one of the like the follow-up question I have to that is, when you are working with these guys, like we take a very strong approach to goal setting. Like something that we pride ourselves on is making sure that our clients have goals outside of bodybuilding, that if they're really pushing their physique development, I'm a big believer that you need to have multiple angles of growth in life, and that your physique should complement those things, and the other things in your life should complement your physique. So if you know, a really extreme example I give is like, if you go into a bodybuilding show and you end up broke and trying to, you know, suck, you know, quote unquote dick for $20 because you've got nothing else going on and you've run yourself into the ground, I've failed as a coach because your life is a failure. I've failed you because I've put this pressure to this thing to be so important that you end up on the street doing drugs because, you know, you can't afford it to live a normal life. I've let you down as a coach. We've prioritized the wrong things. If we have a structure and a system where you are predicated on growth in all aspects, and that leads to a better outcome for you, and then the results of your physique are a byproduct of that growth, then we have succeeded. That to me is like where I've noticed my most successful athletes is they take that approach seriously and they know why they're competing. And with that, they like, I want to grow in other areas of life alongside it. That's where I've seen the most successful athletes for me. In guys that you're, and again, I know that answer is going to be, it depends, but do you have a kind of like a, I guess, a identified sort of profile here where are you seeing rollers and wrestlers and grapplers that are they're doing better because they have very clear whys. They're clear on what they're doing this for and what it means to them, why they love it. Not just, oh, you know, I've got to butt heads and I want to go wrestle and mess some guy up. There's an actual love to the art of it. There's a love to the game. There's a love to the growth in it. And are you seeing on the contrary to that, you know, people that are just kind of rushing in perhaps don't have that clarity of what they really want to achieve out of the sport. They might, you know, they'll tell you they want to win. That to me is rarely a deep enough goal for my bodybuilders where I'm like, I want to know what you want to get out of this sport. What do you see this doing for you in 5, 10 years time where you're like, I'm so glad I started this journey. Do you see something like that in wrestling and BJJ?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. One thing that I try to talk to all my athletes about is something I call the VIP method, or vision, intention, and purpose.
Yes.
And I think goals are great. Like goals are awesome, but almost every competitor that I've talked to, like, what's your goal? Oh, my goal is to win. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, great. I've never heard that before. Like every single person in your bracket all has the same goal. So if your goal is to win, like you're nothing special. Like I'm just sorry. However, your vision may be different. And I consider like the goal being an important part of the vision of like, okay, your goal is to win. That's great. How can we fill in this vision? The vision of how you're going to go from where you're at now to standing on top of that podium after just smashing your entire bracket. And what are the changes that you need to go through to be able to do that? And so I'm really, really big on having athletes create a vision and constantly drawing back to that as opposed to just the goal. So there's one guy that I'm working with right now. He's a firefighter. It's just been awesome working with him because he is really locked in to his vision. He's like, man, like I'm 39. I'm not super old. I still feel like I have something to give athletically. I'm at a point in my career as a firefighter where I have a little bit more time to kind of invest in things. And I'm going to go to this competition. I'm coming for blood. I'm trying to win, but I really just want to take this, like the sweetness of my youth that I still have left, and I want to do something with it. And I want to like be proud of myself looking back, like, man, I really invested in this athletic journey that I can look back and say, like, hey, regardless of the outcome, even though the goal is still to win, regardless of the outcome, I know I put it out all put it all out on the line, and I really worked for that. And that's part of his vision. So I think vision is huge. And then from vision, I also encourage athletes to look at intentions. So VIP, vision, intention. And the better that an athlete can get at setting the right intentions for all the different things that they're doing, the more juice they can squeeze out of that fruit, so to speak. So if you understand the intentions of this workout, hey, the intention of this workout is to move really fast and really explosive. I know you could probably stack on another plate each side and lift it, but it would be a grinder. And that's not the intention of this workout or the intention of this meal. Like the intention is not just to get any random assortment of carbohydrates. Like you don't need to like slam Sour Patch Kids. It's probably a little bit better if we take like a page out of Stan Efferding's book and say like, hey, post jujitsu, let's have monster mash, ground beef and rice. The intention behind that is going to serve you better as opposed to just kind of blankly looking at, oh, carbohydrates, like I'll slam Skittles and Sour Patch Kids. And once you kind of have the right intentions set up with all the different things that you're doing that are leading you towards fulfilling your vision, you can also start diving into the purpose and getting a better understanding of, okay, what is the purpose behind what I'm doing? And purpose can go from as big as like, what is the purpose of me as a 39-year-old firefighter dad with kids? What is the purpose of me challenging myself this way and being a role model for them? It could be as big as that, all the way down to what is the purpose of taking glutathione on our recovery days to make sure that we're recovering a little bit better for the next week of training. So that's typically how I look at it. And what I really try to drive athletes to invest in is like, hey, we're going to talk about your vision and we're going to be always bringing it up. And then let's also look at the intentions, making sure that you're bringing the right intentions into everything that you're doing. And you don't need to necessarily become a PhD in sport physiology, but I do want you to have a little bit of the understanding of the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing. That way that, as a coach, I'm able to get a little bit more buy-in from you. You're able to trust the process a little bit more, and we can keep moving forward.
Like that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Viktor Frankl. Anyone who hasn't read it, The Man's Search for Meaning is a fantastic book. It's on our recommended reading list for anyone and everyone. It's such a eye-opening story. But he has a famous quote that he's kind of hijacked from, I'm going to absolutely butcher. I believe it was Nietzsche, but I might be wrong. And it was, he who has a why can bear any how. And the way you described it there, when it's not even just can bear anyhow, but I believe that then they become motivated for the why. Once you understand it, once you have a why and you understand why you're doing something, you understand the why behind the reason for it, you then become motivated to understand and execute better. And when you have that clarity of purpose and intention, it becomes a lot easier to know why you're doing things and then buy into that thing that you're doing. Trying to get bodybuilding clients to restrict to certain carbohydrates or certain vegetables coming into peak week, because we know that fermentable, fibrous, cruciferous vegetables are horrible for your stomach and waistline come show day. We need to pull those out and give you just very basic vegetables and very easy digestible foods. Yes, we want to peak and fill you up if it's necessary, but The bigger concern is how do you look on the day? How are you bloating, digesting, how are you tolerating? So if you go, smash a bunch of voluminous food because you're so hungry and you've extended out your waistline and now all of a sudden you're bloated and look like shit, well, all that work's been wasted because we couldn't control that last final week. So, having that clarity with athletes, say, you know what, you're going to be hungry right now. This is going to suck. But the intention here is to bring a tight waist and digestion into peak week that you can then tolerate the food so you look good. The purpose is so that you look good and you fucking win or bring your best chances to win. Like, and getting them to understand that. And then they go, oh, that makes sense. As much as I want that extra volume right now, I'm not going to do it. I can tolerate the suffering, as you said, that deliberate intentional hardship, because I know the reason behind it is my best look on show day. Or for your fighters, it's choosing the right carbohydrate sources so that I know I'm fueled effectively after weighing in so that I can get back on the mats and actually be a very effective fighter, as opposed to choosing some shitty foods, post weigh-in burgers and chips, and all of a sudden I feel greasy and bloated and crappy. And then all of a sudden you get to the fight day and you're just not rolling the best you can. You're not throwing hands the best you can because you've chosen shitty foods because you didn't listen to your coach. That's kind of what that reminds me of. And I think it rings so true across so many fields. That just having that understanding of why something matters and the purpose and intentionality behind it makes such a drastic difference for someone executing it.
100%, 100%.
Actually, I actually want to touch on like that. I think it crosses over so many fields. This is a really great transition to. I've got only a few more questions because I know we've kind of got an hour here, a little bit more. But one of the big things that you shared a lot of, and I try to share similar philosophy. I believe our sport, I believe our interest, our hobbies, our passion transcends the field that we coach it in, meaning the lessons of bodybuilding, quite often when I work with my athletes at a deeper level, transcend or traverse the field of bodybuilding into everyday life, their relationships, their business, their career, their studies. And it makes up a large part of what I teach, which is like lessons in life or lessons in bodybuilding and how it correlates to success elsewhere. You speak a lot similar on the disciplines and lessons that BJJ teaches, the combat sport teaches. What are some examples of that where you see that crossover effect of, you've done some really hard, deliberate camps, you might have done back-to-back 6 months. What are you seeing that then teach individuals, whether it be the hobbyist or the hardcore guy that's rolling every other weekend? What are you seeing that teach them and then take away and they just go, I'm so glad I did that?
Yeah, I think jujitsu has a lot. I think kind of like some of the more obvious ones that a lot of people have talked about are like it keeps you humble, like first day at jujitsu, getting submitted by someone who's 50 pounds lighter than you is definitely really humbling. So there's that stuff, which is like, that is definitely a huge benefit. That's definitely important to go through, but I think some of the more, I don't want to say unpopular, but maybe like less recognized or maybe underrated benefits that jujitsu has, and even in some aspects wrestling, is that it gets you really comfortable with being in positions where you have to take on a lot of pressure, like physical pressure, but I think also like there's psychological pressure. Like when you have someone that weighs heavier than you sitting on your chest, like that's a really vulnerable place to be. And the longer you do jujitsu, and as long as you have good training partners and a good coach, you technically, and I guess like from the tactical standpoint of jujitsu, you get more comfortable with that, where you're not going to freak out and you know how to escape and all that stuff. But I even think psychologically, like getting used to the physical pressure of another body being on top of you can be pretty daunting for a lot of people. And the more that people get exposed to that and get used to that, I think I don't know like the exact way to describe it, but it almost gives it's like a secret superpower almost, knowing like, not that like, and maybe some people do this, but not that, I would ever walk down the street and be like, if that guy sat on my chest, like I'd be totally fine. Cause that'd be kind of weird to be thinking about all the time. But just knowing like, hey, I go to jujitsu this many times per week and I'm getting smoked a lot of days out of the week. I'm pretty sure I can handle myself. I'm pretty sure like I can be much like, you stand up taller with your chest out a little bit more, not in a braggadocious way or in a cocky way, but just saying like, look, like I feel confident in my own skin because I've put myself in these extremely vulnerable, uncomfortable positions and have gotten like worked really, really hard from those positions. And now when I step away from those, I feel better prepared for anything else that might put a little bit of pressure on me. And I think when people structure their training well, especially as they get better, they are going to continue to find ways to experience that. So when I first started training jujitsu as a white belt, it's like everybody was putting me in those positions. Everybody was like taking the wind out of me, crushing my neck, twisting my arms, all that stuff. But as I've kept training and training, I'm getting better and better. My skills have improved. And now I'm a brown belt now. So I'm not a black belt, but I'm in the upper belt range, so to speak. So most of the people in class aren't going to be brown belts. And I could just choose to like take it easy now that it's like, oh, I can kind of like clown on some of these guys and never feel that experience again of feeling that pressure on me, like the psychological pressure or the physical pressure. But I think the guys that really get the most benefit out of jujitsu keep finding ways to put that pressure on themselves, keep finding ways to like, hey, maybe you are training with someone that you're more experienced than, but you're going to let them start in a submission and you got to figure out how to escape. Or maybe you're training with someone that is in better shape than you. And they technically, they may not be there, but physically, like they're going to wear your conditioning down. So just getting in the habit of being in those positions, those difficult positions where you feel that physical pressure and psychological pressure, and then making the decision to keep going, like keep drawing from that well, I think is really important. That can have huge benefits for just your overall mental strength, your overall mental resiliency, your overall confidence for everyday life.
Like one of the things you kind of touched on here, which I think is evident in the way you view BJJ and I think combat sport in general. It's something that I believe quite strongly in, is that life is going to be suffering no matter what. Doesn't matter what you do, who you are, or where you're from. Everyone has a degree of suffering. If you want to get better at anything, if you want to push at anything, if you simply want to move up the ladder at your career, or your job, or your business, it is going to be a degree of suck. I mean, it doesn't matter. We can all sit on the podium and talk about our victimhood and who's had it worse and who's bad at what, and I cop this. But at some degree, everyone has a degree of suffering that is just simply the nature of the human experience in my view and what I've seen. The thing that I think helps correct for that is, as you've kind of alluded here too, with like, knowing that you've had these kind of, bigger guys sit on your chest, for example, or they're starting in these more dominant positions, is what I call deliberate specific suffering. You're choosing the route of suffering you're going to take. If you know that there's going to be suffering no matter what, choosing how you suffer for a means of growth and improvement generally leads to a greater degree of psychological resilience and emotional stability. You're learning how to better handle yourself. You're choosing things to find out. You're working and pushing yourself under these degrees of pressure to improve and get better. You're evolving. You're essentially evolving as a person through a deliberate means of suffering. Now, if you're going to suffer no matter what, it makes the most sense that you pick at least what that is. And you can find the things like, I would much rather suffer learning how to grapple and wrestle than be drunk and broke on the street. I would rather learn to suffer dieting than be, 20% extra obese body fat from the most unhealthy position possible. I'm suddenly 45, 50% body fat and my cholesterol's through the roof and I can barely breathe. I'm going to choose the opposite ends of that. I'm going to choose to put myself in these positions that force me to get better and improve as a person. We're all experiencing a degree of suffering, but I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I can choose what that is and learn to leverage and grow from it. And that makes me a better fighter. It makes me a better person. It makes me a better coach. It makes me a better business. It makes me a better student. It makes me a better student of life, really. And I think that's kind of what and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's kind of what you're alluding to here for listeners to kind of really take that home, is the deliberate, specific, intentional suffering, choosing what that suffering is going to be, and allowing that to force you to grow because you keep showing up, especially in something that is hard. Going to a job you hate and kind of grinding through the hours, I wouldn't say is intentional suffering for growth. You're just kind of going through the motions. But if you're choosing BJJ, you're choosing combat sports, you're choosing bodybuilding, powerlifting, whatever sport you might be into, that hard thing that's the next level you have to push towards, that upper echelon of the next level, that's hard. That's going to take constantly showing up when you don't want to. It's going to take beating your body down. It's going to take, the resilience to keep showing up day after day when you feel like absolute crap. Getting on stage after a 20-week prep it's not the exciting experience that everyone thinks it is. It's great fun when you're there if you take in the presence, but everyone thinks it's this great, glorious moment. Their life's going to change forever. It's over in 5 minutes and it's painful. You're like, I'm in such condition here. My body fat's so low, and I'm so exhausted that like posing hurts, but I'm so amped up with
Mhm.
adrenaline that I love it. So it's like fighting's the same way. You know, you got this moment in the mat where you're like, this is going to change my life and I'm going to mess this dude up. And suddenly you get humbled because he's grappling you. Like, it's intentionally selecting something to suck through until you get better. And that makes you a better person as a byproduct.
100%. 100%. Couldn't agree more.
Now, I want to, like, I think that in and of itself is a takeaway lesson, but I want to finish on one particular thing because fighting, you know, I just actually did some research yesterday in the way in which like micronutrition and micronutrient health, body metabolic flexibility actually proves to improve resilience, psychological stress, physical resilience in life and during stressful situations. One of the things I want to touch on coming out of the back end of fight camps, you know, I've done some work with Marek Health, obviously. Love Steve, love the team over there. I had many of the guests on the podcast, fantastic. Many of the coaches. You're with Marek Health. You're an affiliate through Marek Health. You send your guys there. I think it's important to note, in the same way that we sort of send the post camp health phase for our bodybuilders, what are some post camp health concerns that you see in the really aggressive, you know, rollers, grapplers, fighters, camps where they're going to the extreme, they're dieting too hard, they're not coming in condition? What are some warning signs? I guess, like we go back to that understanding the why is important. Why is it important to come in condition so you don't have to deprive yourself of so much nutrition and nutrients? What are you seeing that are some of the health concerns coming out of camps for blood work for you guys that we can probably address to prevent that happening?
Yeah, it depends on the competitor and depends on kind of how good of a job we did pre-competition. You know, the guy that says like, "Hey, Coach Jay, nice to meet you. Can you coach me? I got a comp in 8 weeks." Like, that's going to be that guy might be hurting quite a bit more post comp than the guy that maybe I worked with for 6 to 9 months and just did one competition. So it is dependent on the athlete. But the biggest thing for me is I plan their training the week after to be intentionally like really, really, really low intensity, but still give them something to do. Because I've seen this happen a lot, and I know I'm guilty of this when I was a competitor in jujitsu and wrestling. If the competition doesn't go your way, it's really tempting to go super hard in the paint the
Yeah.
first day back. And I think that's where guys mess themselves up. The competition themselves is going to induce a lot of stress. They're going to be really, really sore, probably going to have some inflammation. If they were really deep in a match and maybe they got their arm popped, they might, have some minor or major injuries post competition. But I think the thing that really messes guys up is when their frustration over their performance drives them to go even harder in that extra depleted, extra fatigued, extra under recovered state that
Mhm.
following week. And so I try to be really deliberate about say like, hey, you compete on this day on Saturday. This like, you know, get some good rest. If you like want to like take some time with the family and just like hang out, chill, do whatever on Sunday, like go for it, do it. The mental recovery of just not being under stress of training camp is important. But on Monday, we're still doing something. And it's very deliberately like low volume, lower intensity, very restorative. From a blood work perspective and kind of on that perspective, I think when athletes are constantly competing, they accumulate and constantly training and constantly competing, they accumulate a ton of oxidative stress, which could lead to all sorts of issues. It can mess with their immune system. It can cause some cognitive issues as well. And so really, I try to make sure like, hey, post competition, let's make sure that like you're really taking some time to recover, like mentally, physically, depending on where they're at with getting their blood work from Merrick. We might say like, hey, like get your blood work done now, and then let's look at it and see if there's any extra stuff that we need to do. And usually I leave that up to the guys at Merrick. I mean, you've worked with them, I've worked with them. They are absolutely fantastic. And so post competition, like in an ideal world, like someone does their biggest, most important big kahuna competition, I won't have them really do in anything competition prep wise for at least 8 weeks. Like I really encourage guys to do at least an 8 week off season. So that way they actually get time off the mat where sometimes I tell guys like, hey, like go do something new. Like, have you ever tried rock climbing? Go try rock climbing this week. Have you ever tried paddleboarding? Find a place to paddleboard. Like, don't go to jujitsu for a little bit. Not, super long or anything, but at least like a week or maybe like 10 days or something. That way they're like actually able to decompress from all the emotions, all the physical stress of competition. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I focus on. I mean, injuries are huge. So in jujitsu, like a lot of times guys, even if they win, they might come out of there with a popped ankle, a popped elbow. A lot of guys have a lot of neck pain, and then competing doesn't really do your neck any favors. So we might take a lot of time to be really careful with how we're kind of restoring some of those tissues. And, heaven forbid, if they do get really injured and messed up, then yeah, we do have to kind of go that route where it's like, hey, before you even think about competing again, if you care about the longevity of your career, like go check out a PT or go check out someone who could take a look at your knee. You can try to you can walk, and that's great. But if you want to continue walking pain free, like let's take care of this now before you dive into another training camp.
Yeah, so surprisingly interesting. As much as like we sort of touched on at the start of the conversation was like people mock combat sports, mock bodybuilding, bodybuilding mocks combat sports and CrossFit and yada yada. Ironically, the approach we take to a quote unquote camp and or prep, whatever you want to call it, very similar layouts. It's just the duration's often slightly different. My guys run 20 to 24-week preps because we want to control rate of loss and maintain as much muscle tissue. You guys go harder on the mats and really go into the paint on that for that 8-week block, ramping up conditioning whilst you're already conditioned. And then you kind of have that taper phase leading into it so you can alleviate fatigue and stress. And then you run a health, what we have termed a health phase post comp or post fight, which is like take the time to rest, replenish. We might do some light metabolite work. We're doing like a little bit of blood flow restriction, or we're doing like, sets of 15, 20 rep sort of sets with maybe 2 sets of exercise for 4 exercise. Like it's next to nothing, but it's just moving food and substrates around as opposed to like, let's go right, grind into it and try and build tissue week 1 post comp. We're getting blood work done, getting nutrients back in the system and trying to maximize that recoverability. Because like, as you know, the body doesn't grow or respond under high duress stress. It's the fight or flight system is not ideal for maximizing growth, recoverability, and performance. To a degree, performance, yes, because it's the idea is you're fighting for your life. That's it's going to be useful. But in terms of like growing tissue, building the body, recovering effectively, performing at your best, a permanent state of stress is not a good position. A permanent state of inflammation and just being grossly overworked is not the ideal way to grow and perform. So, having that what seems like a sort of post match or post comp, post camp sort of health phase is very similar to how we do things, which is like, hey, before you go do this again, let's get fucking healthy. Let's actually get you in a position where you can. And I like the way you sort of said, go do something different. I give that to my guys. Like, for you and me, we joked about this on Instagram. It's what reading comics. It's going to like, get involved in some nerd shit. That's what we do. But for the other person, I'm like, get outside the house, go do something different. I like to game, so I game with my downtime, but it might be like, get outside, get some fresh air, go throw the football around, go throw the pigskin around, do something different, get outside of your world so that you can just relax for a second, and then we'll come back to camp.
For sure. Dude, I have never heard someone call it a health phase, but if you don't mind, I think I might steal that because I think that is perfect. And that I think does a great job of even highlighting more importantly the intentions behind that. Like it's not just taking a week off for the sake of taking a week off or however long the post comp health phase is, but it's like, hey, you're not at your peak post competition. And especially from a health perspective, you're not at your healthiest. So if you care about all the things that you're telling me you care about being able to feel and perform your best, being able to lift heavy and roll hard, being healthy, it needs to be taken into account. And so I'm already thinking like I got to go into all my athletes and start like changing their logs and their spreadsheets. So like this is no longer a post comp deload. This is a post comp health phase.
Hell yeah, I love it. That's awesome. See, look, combat sports, bodybuilding, we're crossing over, we're synergizing.
That's right. They need to have a hybrid event where like you pose and then you throw down and start rolling.
I'd tear so many muscles. my shoulder.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, being dried out and people pulling on your biceps and your hamstrings and stuff. Something's gonna pull.
My mobility is already not great, let alone hyperextending my shoulder, getting armbarred. Not the best.
Yeah.
Dude, I've got 2 rapid fire questions for you, and we're gonna wrap it up there. some ones I usually ask my guests to finish things off. One, what is a book in your field and outside of your field that you recommend everyone read? Like, given our conversation, I'd love something from you, like lifestyle, mindset, something life discipline that you've read that's really changed your life, and something, whether it be combat sport, nutrition, training, that you think is useful, even stress management. I don't really care. But what are two books in your field and outside of your field that you recommend people go read and take in?
Outside the field, there's an awesome book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer.
Mm.
And that book really changed my life. Like if we had this conversation a couple years ago, I'd probably say like some super like hard-nosed book about like waking up earlier and being more intense. But as I've gotten older and matured a little bit, I've realized like I got enough intensity for life that I'm probably good. I probably should work on like the opposite end of like also dialing things back and like understanding the importance of rest and the importance of having a more balanced life. So that's been really beneficial for me. The ruthless elimination of hurry. Um, I think with and I think you and me are probably similar in this way, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for guys like us, we probably don't need to watch more motivational content.
Yeah.
Like we got it. So I think for a lot of guys, like the guys that are most into motivational content, I think ironically, and I know I've been that guy, we probably don't need it. We probably need something to balance and kind of like counter the scales a little bit on how much intensity we're running with constantly. So that would be the first book, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And then when it comes to things that would be important for grapplers and other combat sport coaches, I think Kelly Starrett's Becoming a Supple Leopard is going to be fantastic. From an athlete's perspective, it does a great job of giving you some tools and ideas on how to better take care of your body. If you're not, you don't need to be a physical therapist, but just having some basic understandings
Mhm.
of like, hey, this is probably the range of motion your shoulders should be able to comfortably move in. If you come home from jujitsu and you can't, here's some things you can do to help fix
Yes.
that. So I think it's great for athletes. And then I think it's also great for coaches, just understanding like, hey, I should be, as I'm watching someone lift, as I'm watching people's check-in videos, I should be able to very quickly be able to see and understand how someone's body should be moving. And if they can't, I need to be able to have tools to help them through that. So Becoming a Supple Leopard, I think, is another fantastic pick.
Great choices. Yeah, I'm definitely going to read that one. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. That sounds good. Final question. You finished camp, you finished fight week, you finished being in prep. What is your go-to meal that you're putting back into the body where you're like, I'm fucking smashing this bad boy? You Americans all have such different answers. I always love asking because there's this, you guys, East Coast, West Coast, North, South, there's so many different food variations that it's like, I always get a different answer every time. It's fantastic.
Oh man, I haven't competed in so long, so I haven't had like a post comp meal. But like if I go through like I don't compete anymore, but I still like creating like little training camps for myself where
Yeah.
I get really deep into like I'm gonna go to jujitsu 5, 6 days a week for the next 8 weeks and train with the guys that are competing, even though I'm not competing. And post competition, I honestly really just love like a really good steak with rice, which is ironically what I'm usually eating during training camp, anyways. But I also love my mom's homemade cookies. So if those are available, I'll take those too.
And I'm the same way. I love post comp. I love just a big juicy rump porterhouse steak, and then
Oh
like
yeah.
just like chips and vegetables with it, but without worrying about whether it's weighed or deep fried. Like just give me some hot chips, some vegetables, and a big fat juicy steak, and I'm good. That's my first meal. That or a shit ton of sushi.
Oh, sushi's a good option. And you did bring up a good point. I sometimes think like once you get, and I've only done one bodybuilding show, so I'm not saying like I'm, super familiar with all the rigors of bodybuilding or anything, but I think sometimes when you go through a season, whether it's bodybuilding prep or prepping for a jiu-jitsu competition, just you almost kind of don't even care what you eat afterwards. You just don't want to think about it. And
Yeah.
just not having to think about it is almost as euphoric as whatever you could be eating. So even if it is just like a porterhouse steak and some potatoes, it's like I'm not even thinking about it, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah. Honestly, man, I even now I'm deep in my off season. I'm putting on weight, putting on size, trying to hold condition. My cheat meals, my free meals, my refeeds, my coach gives me, it's usually like sushi. It's sushi or some form of Japanese or Thai or Chinese where it's like chicken and rice anyway, but it's just someone else cooked it and made it taste better. That's I'm like that replenishes me for the week. I'm like, I'm so chill with this. This is so good. Throw some cookies in there and I'm golden. So that's like to me, I'm exactly that. That's exactly me. It's like I love what I love. I just love that someone else made it for me. I'm just like,
For
that's
sure.
that's it. Dude,
For
how does
sure.
everyone find you? Information. I know we're speaking about the Matrix previously. How do we find everything so people can get in touch with you and download all your stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So easiest way to find me is on Instagram and YouTube at Joshua Settlage. You guys can tap into my podcast, which is the Settlage Strength Podcast. And then for any grapplers out there that want to develop elite grappling athleticism, we have the Strength Matrix, which is our training and education platform. We got free training programs on there that basically help you kickstart your grappling athleticism over the next 30 days. Has your training program, simple and clean diet guide, recovery protocols, sleep toolkits, really everything that you would need to help you kind of balance the rigors of training both in the gym and on the mat. And you can check that out at thestrengthmatrix.com.
Man, I love it. And obviously, a big shout out to our friends, Marek Health. Big Steve-O connected us both for a fantastic chat. So I do appreciate Little Smokey. The dude is everywhere and doing everything. It's fantastic. I love the guy.
Yes, sir. I love Smokey. He's a great dude.
Man, I appreciate you so much for jumping on. Thank you for giving us your time and your wisdom and knowledge. It's been an absolute ball.
Thank you, man. Catch you next time.